So our next participant for continuing this dialogue around how we situate epistemology in both in regional terms and also ethically and morally. I'm looking forward to our next presenter, but I do not see Ayokunle in the listing of participants here.
I'm actually here.
Oh, sorry, I don't. Could I ask you to come on screen, please?
I'm on screen.
Oh, no. Okay, now I see you. Okay, if we can
Thank you.
flip, yeah, if we can flip your image. Yes, Ayokunle, you're sideways. I think your camera's turned sideways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it okay this way?
Yeah, keep going, keep going. Yeah, you're still sideways.
Still sideways. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Uh,
Is it better this way?
no, you're still sideways.
Okay. Let me put it this way. It's not.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, still seeing you sideways. So, I guess maybe we can just continue then, if no one minds. Is there a way? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Is it better this way?
Still sideways. So we'll just go to
Okay,
your.
maybe you. Yeah.
Yes. But now we're only seeing half of your face.
You can only see half of my face. How about this?
Yes, slightly better. Yeah, so we'll continue. Yeah,
Better.
so thank you so much. So the lead author for the paper, Dr. Ayokunle Omobowale, and Dr. Okunle, I would invite you to identify the co-authors. The title of the paper is Decolonizing Sociology Through Popular Culture Music Research, Nigeria's Liberal Democracy in Focus. Dr. Ayokunle, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamari. I also appreciate Professor Latas, Akil, and everyone that is online now on this podcast. Great appreciation to Caroline, who invited me to participate in this discussion and also in this special publication. The colonizing discourse is like a rescue that has come to the epistemology of neocolonial studies, especially in the third world, and in this case, making particular reference to Nigeria. Lately, there has been a lot of critical queries on the importance and the relevance of the neo-colonial discourse on contemporary realities of the third world, and particularly contemporary realities in Nigeria. In fact, there are scholars who argue that the neo-colonial discourse should be expunged from the curriculum. And of course, there are institutions that no longer teach it. However, there's really no how we can appreciate and understand the reality of the third world, the reality of developing countries, the reality of African countries, and particularly Nigeria, without discussing their colonial realities, their post-colonial realities, and their connection with the West and the modernist countries. The title of our contribution to the special issue is Decolonizing Sociology Through Popular Culture, Music Research. Popular culture depicts the reality of the people. It has a currency. It discusses the reality of the people or presents the reality of the people in context. However, popular culture and popular music are usually seen in the realm of the ephemeral, the realm of not so important, that only binds the people of the subaltern, the people of the lower classes together in discussions, in chants, in music, in proverbs, and so on and so forth. But my team and I see popular music, popular culture as embedded with deep data, very rich data that describe the reality of the people. And in this case, we studied the popular music of two major Nigerian artists whose music are quite popular, and they have global reach. And these individuals are Burna Boy, Ebun Ogudu, and Falano. Burna Boy sang The Monster You Made, and Fal's music was This Is Nigeria. These two music these two albums depict the reality of liberal democracy in Nigeria. Liberal democracy is expected to be, in quotes, the messiah. It's expected to be the strategy to bring governance and development closer to the people through popular votes, through the electoral process. Okay, and it's expected that when popular politicians are elected to office, they are going to put in their best to advance the cause of the country, to reduce underdevelopment to the barest minimum, reduce poverty to the barest minimum, and so on and so forth. However, liberal democracy in Nigeria has been a reflection and the reality of a few privileged politicians who are able to work with the economic class to get to positions of power in government, and at the end, they benefit themselves, the political and the economic classes, more than the people they are meant to represent. Hence, liberal democracy in Nigeria has resulted more in underdevelopment, in poverty, and in increase of the poverty-stricken classes who remain vulnerable to the whims and caprices of the political and economic classes. In their music, and in this case, Burna Boy describes in The Monster You Made, it describes the abject poverty that the people of the country are subjected to. It describes exploitation that is founded right from the colonial period up to the post-colonial period. It describes the exploitation that the people make. that the people in government exact on the lower classes, on the subaltern classes, and how the people are now restive. They are not satisfied with the reality on ground. And so the reaction to liberal democracy in Nigeria is that of inappreciation, is that of possible rejection, if possible. However, liberal democracy is what we are still practicing, despite its very compounding reality on the psyche of the people, on the socio-economic reality of the people. It's not necessarily leading to development, but it's presenting a people that are subject to poverty, subject to underdevelopment, despite the vast resources that the country has. And in This is Nigeria, Files describes people who are extremely poor and unfortunately are surrounded with broken down social infrastructure, hospitals that are unable to take care of the medical needs of the people except those who can pay for it, and those who cannot pay for it, they may have to resign themselves to fate. It describes an educational system that is broken down, that may not be able to really uplift people from the realities of poverty that they are subjected to. It describes a people who have resigned themselves to fate and submitted to the promises from religious figures, the promises of hope from religious figures, who also find ways of exploiting the people they are meant to, or they promise relief to. In short, what popular culture presents, and in this case through popular music, is a current reality of the Nigerian population, which are not ordinarily or may not be ordinarily captured using the objective procedures. The subjective approach captures the taking for granted realities of the people. And my team and I posit that one of the major epistemic approaches to appreciate deeply the social reality of the people is by studying popular music and popular culture. As people are singing the music, they are dancing to it, they seem to be giving themselves some social psychological relief, but in the reality, they are expressing out their frustration to the socioeconomic conditions in the country, their frustration to broken down infrastructure, their frustration to the loss of hope in the context they have found themselves. Okay, and more often than not, when people see some others as experiencing some development, what they see is actually either the political class or people connected to the political class who are uplifted socioeconomically just because of their connection or because of the offices they occupy. So, liberal democracy as practiced in Nigeria at present does not liberate the people. It does not liberate the majority of the people. Yes, we have a reflection of democracy, good, but is there a way the democratic setup could be restructured to advance the majority of the people and their welfare. There is a need to do that. So my team and I recommend that popular music and popular culture shouldn't just be seen as some stuff to be studied once a while, but there is a need to integrate popular culture in sociological studies. There is a need to integrate popular culture in sociological and culture curriculum in Nigerian universities, because popular culture and popular music present the reality of the people. And when properly captured, popular culture can serve as theory, it can serve as method, and can also be veritable sources of data. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kunle. That was wonderful. So that was a rich discussion on the epistemology of popular culture and its implications for sociology. So we'll turn to our final presenters now, and then we will have our open discussion. So the final papers that we're looking at today is by Dr. Bandana Prokayashta and Dr. Farhan Naveed Youssef. The paper is titled On Migrants, Violence, and the Contours of Colonized Knowledge.
Thank you. I should say that Dr. Yusuf actually lost power a little while ago.
Oh no.
I'm not sure whether
Okay.
he's back. I mean, I can see him, but I'm not sure whether whether he's just on his phone or what the situation is. So I'm going to start. There was a part that he was going to talk about. I'll touch it. I'll go on to the He's here. Wonderful. I don't need to say any of that. I'm going to keep myself focused by trying to concentrate on a few slides, some of which people who've heard me speak before have seen, but hopefully there's something new there. So here we go. Okay, so as Dr. Tamari said, our paper is called On Migrants, Violence, and the Contours of Colonized Knowledge. And I absolutely thank Caroline not only for initiating the Third World Quarterly 2-volume publication, but also to invite us back to talk, because it's wonderful to hear people's voices, and certainly the things we write take on a lot more meaning when we actually can hear people's voices. Now, in the interest of what we are doing, I want to say that I am actually going to introduce myself and just touch on the issue of violence and migrants and talk more about the contours of colonized knowledge. And Dr. Youssef will pick up on the issues of migrants and violence, because he not only has written about it, he has on-the-ground experience in trying to understand the issues of migrants and violence. And I should also say our paper works very well with Dr. Archil's presentation before. So my name is Bandana Prokayashta, and I'm at the University of Connecticut in the US. I'm also the Vice President for National Associations for the International Sociological Association. And some of the advice, so to speak, that I will provide at the end is based on my experience working with the heads of national associations of about 70 countries around the world. So all of these are going to be incomplete. All of you have a lot more to contribute, but I'll just share with you what I know. I should also say that while I reside in the US and I'm a citizen of the US, I come from India, and my parents served repeatedly in British prisons, kind of gave up their youth for being repeatedly jailed to overthrow imperialism. And there was a whole movement at that time, a cultural movement, to disengage from what the British were trying to impose on India. So I carry very strong inherited memories and understandings of the world from that perspective. And anything I think is not just thought in English, it's thought in Bangla. So with that, I want to just touch on the issue of migrants very quickly. And I know previous speakers have talked about this, that when we think of migrants, we should, at the very least, question all these categories into which our scholarship is fragmented. Why do we still talk about international migrants and ignore internal migrants and kind of somehow think of refugees as opposed to internally displaced people, and then trafficked people seem to be a different category? These are bureaucratic categories set up by nation states to police the boundaries of whatever these perceived groups are, whereas in reality, you can have people who are internal migrants or international migrants or refugees who can very quickly become trafficked. As Dr. Archil mentioned before, because of desperation to reach, better lives, whether it's online or, whether it is in reality, but also because, and hopefully Dr. Yusuf will mention this, because people can move from one category of being trafficked to other categories of being trafficked. And if you look across those who are sexually exploited, whose labor is exploited, and whose organs are gathered and sold, that pattern will reveal a world of migration and exploitation, which is very different from the categories that I put up here. And of course, you understand that the degrees of violence keep increasing and they become much more explicit. It's always there, but they become much more explicit. A little bit of our paper is about this, but the person we draw on the most is a scholar from India, Ranabi Shomadar from the Calcutta Research Group, because he has been talking about all migration as forced migration, really from the end of the 20th century. But there's a particular paper published in 2012, not in a high impact journal, but it's available on the internet, where he makes this argument about why should we consider all migration as forced migration. So I just want to amplify that and move right along. I'm going to ignore that. So I want to move on to this issue that most of us talked about today. That is, if we want to disengage, of course, we all understand that we need to question what's the knowledge for? Who is the knowledge for? Whose voices should be accounted for? And I'm just quoting Sari Hanafi, who was a past president of International Sociological Association, in a blurb that he wrote about this book that we produced, which talks about the voices of sociologists from around the world. And in this, we tried an experiment. We didn't say, please, write theory, to kind of link to whatever exists. All of that is Euro-American mostly, or so on. We just said that if you were writing theory and nobody gave you any definition of what is important, what might that look like? And this is what it came about. People wrote about Ranabi Shomadar's work and this idea that all migration is forced migration. From Ethiopia, scholars wrote and said, if you were talking about development, we would center the whole conversation on land tenure and governance. And they talked about Desalgin Ramato's work. Writing from the Philippines, George Radix wrote about why don't we consider Jose Rizal, Sukarno, Ho Chi Minh, and people who were writing about societies about the time when Marx, Weber, and Durkheim were writing. Like, what goes wrong when we pick one set of people versus another set of people? Writing from Kenya, Roseanne Njiru wrote about Ifi Amaduemi and as a matter of fact, and she wrote about matrifocality, and there are many others. So basically, the whole exercise in engaging scholars around the world and saying, you say it the way you would think is important, meant that people came up with very different lenses on theory. Now, then the challenge becomes, how do you take these, work them into your teaching, work them into how would you amplify the research that people are doing based on these ideas, and what are the pressure points in which you have to keep working endlessly without end till some of this very valuable work becomes normal, so to speak. And just because we talked about migrants and migration today, I want to offer this, but I can come back to this during questions and answers. Anish has written an excellent book on modular citizenship where he's talking about the ways in which the tools against migrants, and the US is an excellent example right now, that everything used against migrants then gets expanded to citizens. And then from marginalized citizens to citizens who were more in the center of, whatever that nation state was. And then the question becomes the thing that we hold so dear, the question of intersectionality and being in majority positions and minority positions. To what extent are our methodologies able to handle this dynamism? That is, people might be part of majorities and minorities at the same time. You put in transnationalisms, that certainly becomes the case. And I've written about this in 2012. And, also if you start thinking, the languages, what exactly goes into the intersections, all of those questions come into play. So this is the thing I want to talk about, and then, I'll just give some suggestions and end it in the expectation that after Dr. Yusuf speaks, we can discuss these further. One of the problems, as I see it, in our, I would say, lesser ability to make a real dent into the colonial hold of knowledge is because we in academia are not the only people producing the knowledge. And very honestly, in the larger world of knowledge production, we are increasingly small players. Much as it hurts me to say this, I do have to highlight that. There are all kinds of organizations. There are media, northern media, and it's not just northern media. Media in particular nations that are closely aligned to nationalist governments who have these standards of impact factor journals, and we are great in the world, and we need to link up to the world. All of those media are constructing a kind of knowledge about reality that, very frankly, they don't stop to ask us. A variety of NGOs are creating the knowledge about all kinds of marginalities on their own terms. And they are using the affect and the language from older colonial discourses. So too many human rights organizations and other organizations. But what has become really apparent, I would say, in the last decade or so, is this: that a lot of the manufactured content, which is manufactured solely for profit, solely for the purpose of influencing the discourse on social media and elsewhere, these are weaponized discourses. And governments are very frequently using the language that we use, such as decolonization, for a very different purpose. The decolonization appears at the surface to disengage from Western hegemony, but it's actually used to, often, not 100% of the time, but often, to emphasize and establish very rigid hierarchies and control within nation states. And I'll, have you think about that. We can discuss it later. I also, and we published about these, I put some of those references below, but I also want to say the technology generated knowledge, AI. Professor Archil talked about this, the Filipino character that was used by the Dutch for this sting. But other than that, right now we are getting inundated with AI generated knowledge as AI becomes a tool that more and more people are using. And those large language models are designed by, coded by, and ultimately published by people who don't really care about sociologists and sociological knowledge at all. So all of the affect from the older colonial discourses come right into play because who exactly is designing these? It goes beyond the code. It's a new ethical system involved, which is not an ethical just system like we would understand it. So all of these processes are in place. And I think there is a really important idea also embedded in this whole knowledge production that to the extent we produce knowledge, we are also kind of the data mines for knowledge production for profit. So those AI technologies, as many of you know, are also taking what we published, not because the overall trend of knowledge is going to reflect what we publish, but at least to train some parts of the system so that if people like us ask questions, though those ideas can be used, all of that without our knowledge, all of that for somebody else's profit, and all of that with very little heed ultimately to what we are saying. So the task for us becomes quite huge, and therefore it absolutely has to be a collective task. And the last thing I want to just indicate here, very badly really, that gray area is about how we are being kind of, drawn in and inundated into this far more complex knowledge production system. So that, for example, when we go to our universities and insist that they have categories that are not so solely based on global impact journals and so on and so forth, what are the universities using in order to assess whether we should have strong voices or not? And often it goes back to AI tools, it often goes back to a particular kind of technology. And so increasingly, the idea is how do we make an intervention in that process? Okay, so to end my part of it, I want to provide some directions. Most of this comes from my experience with International Sociological Association. I absolutely do not mean to say that we have all the solutions to addressing knowledge hierarchies, but there are a few things going on that I feel are important for people to know. One is International Sociological Association has started a whole series called Sociology In. These are short podcasts and they are done by different national associations. So, when I was listening to Professor Diabu Getzima's talk, I remembered, for example, the podcast by the Ghanaian sociologists who were talking about these changes in sociology in Ghana. So every national association from the African continent, I think we have 3 podcasts right now, and there are more coming. If you go just do sociology in ... it should give you the link. These are freely available. They go right across the world, and there are more coming in by day. So you want to listen to Ethiopia and how they survived the civil war and still have sociologies, please go and listen there. So country by country, you can go and listen to what the histories of the sociologies were. And if we don't understand that, then we are not going to be in deep solidarity with each other. And after all these years, if we're really honest, we know that so much of this already exists, but we have so little time, we don't really read deeply across the world. So this is just like a overview, brief notes, just to get us started. I think it's a worthwhile thing, and it is being done by different countries. It's by no means set out in the North to talk about the global South. The other important series of actions that are happening right now and in this year is on the continent of Africa. And it's being, there is a push to get the East African countries and the sociologists in those countries to get together in a conference and talk to each other. Because very frequently what happens is the scholars from Africa might meet as a whole, or they might come to conferences like ISA and meet, or some European conferences, and they wanted to say, no, we do want to do this on our terms, whichever way we want to do it. It's going to happen this year later. Similarly, the South African sociologist Sasa wanted to get people from other African countries to come to their conference for the same reason. So it's important that you know about these efforts. Vietnam is hosting something in November, which includes a lot of the Asian countries, particularly the smaller ones, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, the kind of countries that you don't normally think about when you're thinking about sociologies, who's producing the knowledge, who's teaching it, and so on. There are also a series of books on sociology and sociologists in social transformation. So the Eastern Europeans already published their book. There's one on the Arab world that's about to come out, and then there's one on the Asian countries that should come out next year. So there are lots of efforts that are going on, and I think if you think of all the efforts plus everything you are doing, the rest of us need to be participants, and in some cases, of course, we lead. But we can be respectful, humble participants repeatedly in order to expand both our knowledge, our understanding, and develop a sense of respect for what people are doing in multiple ways, and what people are doing not fitting into the current boxes if we really want to overturn the current hierarchies. There are a couple of practical considerations for which I don't really have an answer, and hopefully we can discuss it when we have questions and answers. One is, we have shorter term struggles to take on at our universities, within our countries, and then there are longer term considerations as well. Somebody put on chat how particularly authoritarian governments in particular nation states tend to stifle all kinds of critical thinking. And of course, that is the reality for many of us. The other practical consideration is language and communication. So I'm just like, I speak English and I speak Bangla. In fact, when Dr. Yusuf and I were writing our chapter, one of the reviewers said, why aren't you, quoting people or citing people in other languages? And we said, we can't do that because we don't know all the languages in which this work is coming out. We can read the stuff in English, we can read the stuff, in his case in Urdu, in my case in Bangla, and that's as far as our universes go. But here is the thing. Can we require everybody to be bilingual? No. But if some of us can also deal with that universe that I talked about of knowledge creation, which is often happening in European languages, I think we have a part to play. This is not to neglect the languages close to our hearts, but also keep an eye on who and with whom are we trying to intervene. And then on the issue of epistemologies, I know several people mentioned indigenous epistemologies, and there is a rich and growing area, certainly in US, Canada, Australia, and in many other countries. I know the work that's growing in India, for example. we should not be the people who are only doing the symbolic inclusions of those scholars and their scholarly conversations. It's very important that we bring some of those ideas back into our struggles with our universities, with our professional bodies, with our nation states. And not everybody can do it, and not everybody should be doing it at different career stages, but we can organize to do it. So, with that, I'm going to stop and I'll let Dr. Yusuf talk about the migrant portion.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much, Tamari Kitosa, for being our chair, and everyone who stuck with us until deep in the night in Asia, and hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful day or a wonderful night. Thank you.